See, I'm like that guy down there, like that. Vasily Ivanchuk, the legend. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malignant Young Park Dotting inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. So I do have Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So, and this is taken from round 17 of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz from the previous tournament. You know, they haven't started playing today yet, round 8, so we're still waiting. So I figured I'd fill the space with some previous games, because you know, once they start playing Blitz in the tournament, it gets really hard to keep up with. So I mean, you know, they'll play like 30 games, and you're like, man, I can't do 30 games, man. Anyways. For all my people in the Philippines, mabuhay hi to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan? Masaya kang makita kang muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Magandang umaga, magandang bon, magandang araw. Almasal tayo. Ingat lagi, mabuting pagbati. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So yeah, if you guys are ready to go, we're gonna go ahead and see who is Malakas. Bam! Let's go. We got E4. E5, knight to F3, knight to C6, bishop to B5. So these are all brand new moves in the game of chess. Not playing. It's like 600 years old. We got A6, so we do have the Roy López Morphy defense. We have bishop back to A4, which is the most common way to play. This is going to be the #1 way to play. You know, the next best or the next most frequently played is going to be bishop takes C6, and you get into the, you know, the Roy López exchange, which was my favorite when I was playing E4. Knight comes to F6. We see castles by white. Bishop comes to E7. And, you know, you guys can see this is very similar to a Berlin. I mean, after bishop to E7, you see rook to E1. So even though you kind of have a little bit of differences kind of going on over here, you know, you still have, you know, pretty much all the similarities for the Berlin. So B5 comes. We see bishop back to B3. And, you know, of course, as I say before, we're not going to go knight A5 immediately because you're just going to be losing a pawn. You know, for the cost of a little bit of structural damage, but I mean, it's still a pawn. We got castles by black, A4, you know, creating a little bit of space for our bishop to come back and retreat. We got B4, A5, D6, and now we have, you know, this pawn, you know, completely protected. We got C3, which is also another lift for the bishop type of move. Rook comes to B8. You know, the rook, you know, there's no type of like open situation going on over here, but you know, you're anticipating the opening of the file, either the full opening or, you know, at least a half opening. So, you know, if the pawn takes here, you got the knight taking. I mean, you have a half open file here like that. So I mean, you know, it's always good when you're anticipating the opening or at least the half opening of a file to start to get your rook, you know, kind of on where it wants to be. So we got bishop to C4. You know, you had a little bit of some issues with that bishop kind of hanging out there. It was tying the queen down to protecting it. So, I mean, you want your queen to have more movability than that. Bishop comes to G4. We see H3. Bishop goes back to H5 and then D3. And this is the novelty of the game. I think that's really interesting given the fact that D3 is like the most common move played in like a Roy López or a Juco Piano or something like that, because I mean, you know, you're going to bring this knight here, and a lot of the times you're going to back it up to F1 and go like G3 or E3 or something like that, and then a bishop comes out. So, I mean, it's crazy. D3 is a novelty of the game. So, all right, man. Pawn takes C3, pawn takes C3. So, as you guys can see now, it is a completely open file. So, you know, black has pretty much prophylactically put their rook in the correct spot. Knight takes A5, rook takes A5, rook takes B1. G4, which, you know, can be kind of an issue because, you know, you are kind of opening your king up. But, you know, it really depends on the position. There's definitely some positions in the King's Indian that I play as white where, you know, H3, G4 is very, very common and thematic. And, I mean, you're just definitely, you know, playing really good. So, bishop comes back to G6. We got queen to C2, sneaking an attack on the rook. We see rook back to B8. Rook takes A6. So as you guys can see, I mean, everything is fairly even. I mean, the structure, as far as like the piece placement is a little bit different, but I mean, the pawn structure is like almost identical, just despite the fact that, you know, like there's this difference here. But I mean, you have the same pawns on the same squares. So interestingly enough, the computer gives it as triple zeros. It's like, yeah, man, it's dead even. So queen comes to C8, you know, tossing a little bit of a tickle on that rook. king comes to h2, and king to h2 might look a little bit strange because you're thinking like, well, what is that doing? You know, you're just trying to give a little bit of protection to the base of your pawn chain. You know, just trying to make sure that there aren't any, you know, type of issues. I mean, you know, you can see h5 coming at some point, maybe trying to rip stuff open. So you're just trying to get your king into, you know, a little bit better defensive area. King comes to h8. So, you know, both sides are kind of doing their little safety with their king type thing. Queen comes to e2. We see c6. Rook comes up to a7 because why not put it on the 7th rank, and then also why not attack an undefended bishop? You get a 2-for-1 special with this move. So the bishop comes back to d8. And so, I mean, you have a little bit of an advantage as white here. So you're maybe like 0.2, 0.3 ahead. So, I mean, you definitely have a little bit of an advantage. You know, it's just the fact that, I mean, your pieces are a little bit further advanced. I mean, and then, you know, you kind of have black, you know, kind of in a real passive position with their pieces on the back rank and stuff like that. That's not really where you want your pieces at. Bishop comes to a8. Why not throw a tempo on the queen? And so it's actually making the queen just a little bit uncomfortable right now. The queen comes to e6, which is pretty much its only move. Bishop comes to e3. And then we have actually reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see what move Wesley So plays in this position, it gives white definitely some challenges. Go ahead and pause it and try to guess that. Okay. So, some of you guys might be, you know, kind of looking at the position and wonder like, man, I mean, it kind of seems like maybe there is some type of sacrifice on this square. The interesting thing is the sacrifice actually gives white a pretty nice advantage. You know, white has about somewhere between half a pawn and a full pawn of an advantage with this sacrifice. Now, we'll get into like some of the benefits of the sacrifice in a second, but the move is knight takes g4. After pawn takes g4, queen takes g4, and we actually see knight back to d2. There aren't really any taxes in the position for white. Now, if we just back up real quick, and I wanted to show you once we got to this point here. Now, you guys see that pretty much once the queen came to c8 originally, there was maybe some possible sacrifices and stuff on that square, right? After the king came to h2, king came over to h8, we saw queen to e2. It might seem like in this position, you know, there's a sacrifice here as well, but there actually isn't. This, if you were to go into this, this would actually trap the queen, or at least like just lose you an entire piece. And it's crazy because like just the small differences and just different pieces kind of like sitting in certain spots makes a gigantic difference. So before, when you saw, you know, the knight had to come back to d2, there wasn't really any tactics. If we went for this sacrifice in this position, it would just be completely lost. Knight taking g4, pawn taking g4, queen taking g4. And white actually has the ability, because of the particular placement of the pieces, to actually go knight takes e5. Because this queen is undefended, so your best try is to go over and check with the queen to try to, like, you know, just remove yourself from being affected. After king came to g2, if you happen to take on e5, you're going to be looking at rook to h1, and now your queen is just trapped. So your best thing to do in this position is to actually take care, but you're going to be losing an entire piece after this. And you guys can see that you're just up an entire bishop. You got a pawn, but I mean, it's not the prettiest pawn. Anyway, so I mean, every single situation is different. Every single position is different. So, you know, when you do look at your pattern recognition and you look at like sacrifices and different stuff, it probably won't always be the same every single different position. You have to always calculate and assess a position every time. So getting back to what we had in the game, knight to d2. Queen comes over to h4 with check, because, you know, there's some similarities between situations, right? King comes to g2, and then we got f5. You see that, you know, black has sacrificed a piece. So the thing that you need to think about when you are in a situation where you have sacrificed a piece. Now, okay, yes, for black, you know, white does have 4 pawns. Black has 6 pawns. So they definitely do get a nice amount of pawns for the piece. So when you're doing sacrifices, unless it's like mating, you definitely do want to have at least like 2 pawns, or, you know, maybe best case scenario 3 pawns as an exchange for the piece. And then, you know, you're probably doing pretty good. But when you sacrifice a piece, almost always you have to play as actively as possible, because you are literally down a piece. So the problem is, if you play passively, then that piece is just going to be just completely realized by your opponent, because your opponent's going to be able to regroup their pieces, and then they're literally just playing you being a piece up. So you have to be very active. So F5 is definitely the most active move in the position. Rook comes over to H1 because white is just trying to, regroup. They're trying to defend, because they are getting attacked. But black definitely has the initiative in this position. Queen comes back to F6 because, you guys can see that, black has a little bit more room to breathe now because the position isn't the same as before where it was trapped. Pawn takes F5, bishop takes F5. You see queen up to H5. Let's throw a little tickle here. I mean, the bishop is defending for now, but, you definitely can't do nothing like that. I mean, of course, that's just bad. Bishop comes to B6, attacking the rook. So we see bishop takes B6, rook takes B6. Knight comes to F3, just trying to, defend and, maybe possibly, we can get some knight to G5 situations in there. Rook comes back to G6. And this is actually a really, really nice position. Not really, really nice. This is actually nice position for Wesley. So, like, in this position, the only move that gives black any type of edge at all is bishop to G6. And so this was a very accurate move. So it does a couple of things. Not only does it attack the queen, it also places an attack on this knight and really, really makes it hard to go knight to G5 because you're going to be looking at queen to you're going to be looking at queen to F2 with check, and that's going to be pretty nasty. So it's a very, very accurate, very, very multi-purpose move. Bishop comes back to G6, like I said. So this forces the queen to go back down to G4 because, of course, you have to maintain the protection of this knight. And then so we see D5. Queen comes down to G3. We're trying to throw a double attack on this pawn. But also very accurately, Wesley So goes rook to B2. Not only is it putting a rook on the 7th rank, but you're always, as black, trying to discourage the moving of this knight anywhere. Because this is going to be dangerous for you. This is going to be dangerous for you. So, I mean, you have way too much pressure on this F2 square. And so, black is doing what they need to do to play actively. So, it's just a matter of trying to hold it, which when you're down a piece, it is very, very hard to do. Rook comes to F1. And so, like, now white is in, like, full defensive mode. So, you have to really give it to Fabiano Caruana because he's playing like very, very accurately in the defense of this position being attacked mercilessly like this. We got E4. Knight comes to E5. We see bishop to H5. Pawn takes E4. Pawn takes E4. We got bishop down to C4. So, I mean, pretty much for the past like 10 to 12 moves, both players have played like exactly how you want to play. And like I said, I mean, Fabiano Caruana, he's defending the position beautifully, right? And we actually have, this is the point in the game that things really, really shift. And this is like a very inaccurate move by Wesley So, and it just literally gives a pawn away. E3. So some of you guys might be wondering like, well, what is E3 doing? Like E3 is like literally doing nothing. All it's doing is basically just handing a pawn to white. Because the thing about it is the queen can defend this square from here or here. From here or here. So it doesn't change the nature of the position like whatsoever. So the queen literally just goes over to E3, snaps the pawn. You see H6, and then the queen just comes back. So like I said, it literally changes nothing about the position. And now H6 is creating a hole in your position. And you see this light square bishop. Look at all these light squares around the king. Like this bishop is like nice. This knight is nice. This rook is nice. So you can definitely see in this position that white has like grabbed the advantage like completely 100%. So this is a really, really nice position for white now. And I mean, in this position here, after the queen takes on E3, you don't really have the ability to go knight to E8 because you have back rank issues. And you also have like discovery checks and stuff come in. Like, bishop can come up here. Rook, like you got all kinds of stuff going on, man. So, this is definitely like white for choice. So like I said, we got queen to G3. Rook comes to D2. We see rook up to D7 because, hey, let's trade rooks, especially if we do this right here. This is just like monstrous. Like, this is just great. So we definitely don't want to go into that. So rook comes to D7. We see bishop to F3 with check. We're not trying to move the knight because, we're going to be dropping the rook, and that's just going to swing it back into black's favor. So the king comes down to G1. We see bishop to D5, and it is actually in this position that Wesley So does resign the game. And just to show you guys, I think most of you guys, if not all you guys, can look at the position and say, yeah, man, like, black's down the piece. They only have a pawn to show for it. There's too many holes in the position based off what I said earlier. It's just not defendable, right? You're like, there's just no way to win this. So just to give you guys, anybody who might like be like, hey man, there might be something going on. Anybody there that's doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and just give you just one little sample couple move variation that'll just basically just be like, man, this is just done. Extra done. Knight to G6. Off automatically is the best move in the position. And this is just automatically a fork between the king and the rook. So you're gonna be dropping the exchange. Like, so you're down a piece and you're gonna be dropping the exchange. So it just gets worse. King will come over to G8, which I mean, there's really only two moves. I mean, you either go to G8 or you go to H7. Knight takes on F8. You can toss in bishop takes C4, then rook takes D2. And I mean, this is pretty much the top variation that the computer gives. And you guys can just see, I mean, you're down 2 entire pieces right here. It's just, you just can't do it. You just can't do it. There's no way to win this at all. There's no way to defend this by black at all. So Fabiano Caruana Malakas C Fabiano Caruana in this one. You know, Malakas Wesley C Wesley So also Blitz. You know, Fabiano Caruana is a formidable opponent, and he went ahead and took this one. And so, you know, Fabiano Caruana is a tough cookie, man. Like, he's definitely a tough cookie. You know, anyways, I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by. Makita Tayo Mamaya to my people in the Philippines. And I will see you guys next time.